Hi, everybody. Welcome to the session, Digitizing ESG with Unqork. I'm Matthew Lenikis. I'm a Director of Alliances at Unqork. I'm joined today by Sam Stark, the CEO of Green Project. And I think everyone has heard plenty today about what Unqork does, and I'm sure we're all very familiar. Sam, why don't you give yourself an introduction and talk about what you would do at Green Project?
Yeah, so I'm a co-founder of Green Project Technologies. We're a carbon accounting platform really focused on particularly Scope 3 emissions and even more so financed emissions, and helping companies track and report on what is becoming one of the most complex categories of emissions to report on. My background before Green Project was at Goldman Sachs in their sustainable finance department, and focused really on the similar task, and kind of was seeing what, not just at Goldman, but kind of around the country and even world, both financial institutions and other kind of related institutions were facing with starting to get a handle on their greenhouse gas emissions from new regulatory requirements, from new investor requirements, and saw that a lot of the platforms out there weren't really meeting a lot of the needs in terms of flexibility, in terms of Scope 3 emissions in particular, and so ended up leaving and created Green Project. And we work with around 400 companies, a lot of private equity firms, a lot of financial institutions, insurance providers, and certain just general enterprises as well. But yeah, that's just kind of general background on Green Project.
Awesome. So I know that ESG is a hot topic now. It feels like everyone and all their respective parents and guardians are talking about it. And so I figured, given that it's such a broad topic, I just figured we'd give everyone sort of a lay of the land. What is ESG? What makes it so complex? What is required? What isn't required? I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there. And of course, as with every regulation, there is a timeline that makes what is exactly compliant, what does compliance look like, fairly complex. So what is ESG? When we're talking about ESG, we're talking, broadly speaking, environmental stewardship, social engagement, and governance principles. Each of those has unique principles underneath it. But I think, Sam, like if we just look at what is actually required today, if we maybe talk through, like, obviously every jurisdiction is going to have different products that are in scope, but I guess broadly speaking, maybe focusing on financial services, what do they have to comply with today?
Yeah, so you're starting to see a bit of a convergence with frameworks. Now, there's a ton of frameworks out there. Probably about every acronym you can think of, there's a framework. But you're starting to see a convergence with the frameworks. One thing that is staying pretty consistent throughout all the frameworks is climate is being a really big part of it. So reporting on greenhouse gas emissions is becoming more and more kind of a standard across really every framework that's coming out. The S&G pieces are a bit less standardized. There's different frameworks that include them, whether it's things like SASB, which ISSB is going to be taking after, or kind of more industry-specific frameworks. But in general, what we're seeing again and again is that climate is becoming center and top of mind. And TCFD is kind of the task force on climate-related financial disclosures is becoming kind of the standard that really all of the different regulatory frameworks you're seeing is being based off of. So the SEC's climate proposal, that is based off of the TCFD's recommendations. As of right now, it includes Scope 1 through 3 greenhouse gas emissions. So it would include the indirect emissions from things like financings, from what banks and private equity firms and other financial institutions invest in. That's probably going to go through some lawsuits. So Scope 1 and 2 most people think that will definitely be, which is your operational emissions from like your utilities and direct fuel consumption. But increasingly, almost all of the global standards are including Scope 3. And so for financial institutions, getting a hold and starting to think about the emissions attributed from what you're actually investing in, what you're lending to, is becoming a part of really every framework out there, whether it's in Europe with SFDR, whether it's voluntary frameworks like the ESG Data Convergence Initiative, which is for private equity firms in the US, or whether it's actual regulatory frameworks like the SEC's climate disclosures.
Yeah, so when we're talking about Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3, what is making that so complex with a regulation that is being proposed by the SEC? Like, what is, if we just zero in on, looking at ESG, focusing in on the E, What is it? What is making that so complex for organizations?
I mean, it's really that there's a ton of data. It's really a data issue before it even becomes the issue of actual reduction. So none of the disclosure requirements require reduction. The reduction is something that can help you from an ESG score point of view. It can help you from if you're a public company, there's a lot of benefits for lending and cost of capital and things like that. But really everything in terms of regulatory is really about disclosure, and the complexity of disclosures is there's a ton of data. It's even more than I would say, a lot of people are saying the GHG protocol, which is the carbon accounting equivalent to GAAP for financial accounting, is the underlying framework, but it takes a lot more data than just probably what a lot of companies are doing around financials. You have everything from your operationals, which is scope 1 and 2, which is every utility bill you have, every company vehicle, all the fuel that's being combusted, all refrigerants, those sorts of things. And then scope 3 is the next kind of step, which is every single indirect activity, including your airlines, including what you're financing, including your supply chain. And if you look at it, Goldman's an example of it. They have a net zero supply chain commitment where I came from. That means every single one of the companies they work with are going to have to commit to net zero. And so it's becoming more and more of a business decision, because you have to affect not only your own company, but you have to affect the companies you work with. And so if you're in a supply chain, if you're being financed from some of these larger institutions, you're going to have to start considering your own emissions, even if you're not under one of these regulations, like you're not a public company.
Right. So I think that we have for anyone who's not looking to get too deep into it, I think we have a good understanding of what it's required. And then you talked about a little bit about the voluntary and the distinction between what is required for disclosure and then what companies are actually doing with it. So I guess from an Unqork point of view, we think of things from technology, data, process. I guess in that kind of framework, starting with the technology, what are the biggest pain points that you see companies dealing with?
There's a lot, honestly, but it is right now the kind of status quo is of companies even doing this. A lot of companies aren't even doing it, but for the companies doing it, it's like Excel spreadsheets and trying to collect data from about every source you can think of, from ERP systems, from utilities, from directly from suppliers and vendors, from all these different areas, and kind of putting that in different Excel spreadsheets and trying to come up with a number. And what we're seeing again and again is this is becoming increasingly focused on the rigorousness of, you're going to need it, of a financial disclosure. And so it's going to start being in your the financial disclosures that for public companies, and you're going to have to get limited or some sort of assurance on these things. And so because of that, you need to be accurate and not just kind of pure estimations for everything. You need to actually be following the right frameworks. And the only way to do so, I think, in a feasible way for especially a large institution, is by having some sort of technological platform. Regardless of the pitch for us and Unqork, I think it's something that's going to be absolutely needed to be able to have the auditability and the trail of data, because it's coming from so many different sources. It's not just one point that you can look at.
All right, you sort of jumped ahead of me. But yeah, so I mean. And we'll get to exactly where Unqork fits in on this in just a bit. But what is Green Project actually providing to sort of assuage some of these pain points specifically? Yeah.
So our focus is really on we wanting to make the process kind of as simplified and easy as possible when it comes to the data collection and when it comes to reporting it in the standards that you need. So first and foremost, we have a lot of pre-built integrations, and we can kind of work with Unqork for more complex integrations with things like utilities. We connect to over 20,000 utilities globally, and so we can pull in the data automatically, so you don't have to be constantly uploading utility bills and things like that. So that's one kind of a part to the platform. We also use kind of the most up-to-date emissions factors always, so we go through our own independent audit, and we're able to ourselves and with Unqork provide a full audit trail of all the data that's being collected. And so being able to both have seamless data ingestion, but also seamless transparency is really important for what we do. And then one of the biggest things I think that differentiates us from some of the other carbon accounting platforms is some of our Scope 3 tools, specifically on supply chain and financed emissions. Those are the two probably biggest challenges large corporates are facing, is how can we handle our supply chain emissions and our financed emissions. And we have some seamless data sharing tools for you to engage with your suppliers, for you to engage with your portfolio companies as a private equity firm, or with your kind of lendees as a bank or financial institution. And so I think actually that number 6, the 1 through 5 are all very important and kind of standard across most carbon accounting platforms, but that number 6 is helping places really be able to go that extra layer to get primary data for their Scope 3 emissions, which is how you're going to achieve these pretty ambitious goals that a lot of places are setting forth.
Yeah, and you're mentioning a lot of the fact that there are so many data sources. It's coming from a lot of different places, and I think it's worth noting that when we're talking about collecting ESG data from some sort of data aggregator, it's not as simple as that, right? You talk about utility bills. You're talking about collecting information. I think we're talking a lot about the E, but there's the S and the G aspects that just multiply the number of sources, especially if you're starting to talk about like portfolio, if you're managing a portfolio of companies, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. That's really why, us and Unqork kind of fit really well together, because these things are very complex in terms of getting the data. That's probably the biggest challenge every business faces is just getting the data itself to understand their measurement and to understand where they're at so that they can properly disclose and so that they can properly set targets. And getting the data is something that requires integrations with complex systems. It requires, and that's just on the E side. Same with the S and G side. It requires even more, and there can be a lot of bespokeness to it. And I think a lot of the carbon accounting platforms that you've seen come out have tried to put a one-size-fits-all to everything. And the problem with that is for a lot of institutions that just doesn't work. And so that's kind of part of the flexibility with using Unqork as well as us, is to be able to kind of tailor it to what is needed at individual institutions, as opposed to saying that, this is the exact thing that will work for every single place, because every place has their own kind of sources of data that they have to do.
Yeah, and I think it's important to just conceptualize the fact that with ESG requirements, all these requirements are new. All these regulations are new. The expectations around ESG are so new. And as a result, these sort of nascent sort of expectations and norms are also in flux. And I think one of the things that we've been seeing as a benefit between our two companies is the flexibility, the audit, and being able to swap in and out sources, not only in terms of where you're collecting data, but how you're collecting data. Right? One day, your ability to collect utility company information, or utility bill information, may be an upload of a document connecting to Green Project or to an OCR tool. Alternatively, it could be directly via API, right? And we've seen a lot of our clients talk exactly through these types of requirements to swap things in and out with relative ease. But I think that one of the things that we were hitting on earlier was the auditability aspect, creating robust systems while still keep maintaining that nimbleness to address some of these changes. And I think I would just like to focus zoom in a little bit on that, because I think for anyone who's worked in a financial services institution, audit is always the scariest word that you could throw around. If we could just talk through what are some of those expectations, number one, today, and maybe looking into the future, what that's going to look like.
Yeah, so it's very clear to me that I think a lot of places have set very ambitious targets, and maybe some have. There's a lot of places who haven't, but there's been, and we've talked to different places where maybe their sustainability teams weren't always talking to their finance teams, and so the targets that have been set are now being taken, as far as the SEC, as financial disclosures. And so if you've set, a net zero target or whatever it might be, then you actually are going to have to show and track your progress towards how you're moving towards those targets. And And so very much in the same rigor of financial disclosures, places are going to have to do climate and eventually other ESG disclosures as well, though I think for now it will be climate in alignment with that. And so that means you're going to have to seek getting assurance. We've talked to a few big corporates that are requiring all their suppliers to get assurance as well. So if you're, PE firms investing in portfolio companies, that's coming as well. But who might be private or part of the supply chain. But assurance is going to become more and more the norm. Right now, I think it'll start with limited. It seems like there's going to be kind of over time to get to kind of full reasonable assurance. I think it is over the next few years. And so there's kind of no way around hiding from it or kind of trying to do your best guess. Eventually, you're going to have. And by eventually the next couple of years, kind of a full audit trail and reporting for this. And, we've done work with KPMG and other kind of audit firms before to really try to make it so that we're producing reports in kind of an audit-ready way that we want.
Yeah, I think you bringing up some of our other partners is crucial here because, technology alone is not going to bring the solution here, right? It's going to be, we can certainly enable it, and we can enable it in a robust way. But at the end of the day, there has to be a data strategy behind this. There has to be some compliance around this. That I think, our partnerships and our ecosystem that we are creating is something that is actually stands out relative to what we're seeing out there, other people doing. And talking about an ecosystem, actually, we talked through the collection, the reporting aspect. Maybe if we just zoom in on the remediation, how does that tie into the data, the process, and the data as well that we enable?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a few ways to reduce emissions. There's really three main ways. There's operational changes. There's engagement with the companies you're working with, so your suppliers, the companies you're financing, and then there's offsets and other kind of like renewable, as well as like RECs and renewable products. We've tried to build the system to be flexible for all three, so that you can have kind of a combination of all three to achieve your goals. Unlike the kind of on the partnerships idea that it's not a one company fits every solution. We have partnerships with different of the kind of top offset providers to be able to help companies reduce emissions through offsets and RECs and really trying to kind of vet the highest quality projects that are actually adding additionality, are actually quantifiable, as opposed to a lot of projects that have been out there that have gotten a lot of criticism because they're not actually kind of in the end doing what they say they're doing. So offsets is definitely one of the tools that we've integrated within our platform, but also supplier engagements, finance emissions engagements for you to be able to set targets for the companies you work with, and also kind of partnerships with like energy efficiency auditors and things like that to be able to improve operational emissions. So it's kind of a combo of the whole three, with offsets being, I'd say, the easiest one in terms of just an integrated solution.
Cool. So I think we set the stage, talked about what's required, talked about what people are doing, the inputs, the reporting, the technology enablement, the strategy behind it. And then and now that we've sort of done that, I would like to set the stage, give you the stage a little bit of, showing what is Green Project, how you guys actually bring this all together, and then how we, as in between our two companies, have worked together to bring something truly to life, bespoke for our customers.
Definitely. Yeah. So this is one of the modules. We have kind of different modules to our platform, but really the objective of the platform is to, in an analogy to financial accounting or even tax reporting, is to have it be kind of both easy to use and understand, but powerful in kind of the analytics and reports that you can do. And so, although we don't have a full demo here, within our platform, you can very easily, in the settings, create tons of different integrations. And with Unqork's help, we can even expand those integrations to additional things like ERP systems and more complexities. And you can very easily and seamlessly get the data collected into the platform. We have lots of different ways to slice and dice the data, so so you can understand your emissions. We have ways for you to benchmark, so you can see how you're doing with peers, both on public and private benchmarks. I think there's a paucity of private benchmarks, but we can do that for like PE firms and their portcos. We also have the ability to set targets in the platform for yourself, but you also can set targets for the companies you're working with, like your suppliers, the companies you're financing. And then we have a whole reports tab that pre-fills out reports based on the leading framework. So we can do a basic GHG protocol, scope 1 through 3 inventory report, but we can also help with CDP reporting. We can help with EcoVadis reporting. We can help with reporting to things like TCFD and kind of the different global standards that are coming out. And so being able to have it kind of all in one place, being able to seamlessly be able to both integrate data as well as have it be visualized in kind of a digestible way has been really our objective from the start, and is also our objective for the companies you work with. If you have suppliers, companies you're investing in that are going to need to be doing this as well. And as you can see, there's a marketplace as well where you can access offsets and recs, as well as we have a full audit trail with all the reports that we do. So that's kind of a very fast version of what I'm saying, but we do want to make it very accessible to companies early on in their ESG journey, or companies kind of later stage who need to engage with supply chains and companies they're financing.
Yeah, so I think one of the things I just wanted to highlight there is when I think a lot of people look at a dashboard like this, they think it's just for the company as a whole, right? Like, I am Unqork and this is my carbon footprint and scope 1, 2, and 3, fabulous, I'm done. But what we're really talking about is being able to drill down into, if I am an asset manager, what is my portfolio or my multiple portfolios, or if I am, Unqork, and who are my suppliers, and being able to do that drill down there as well, right?
Exactly, yeah. So we work with about 40 private equity firms and, tons of their portfolio companies, and we provide most of their portfolio companies don't have a sustainability or ESG manager, and we're able to very seamlessly be able to collect and then report back up to the PE firm. It's a slightly different module within the dashboard, but report back up this data, and I think that shows the flexibility of the platform to work with places who don't have a sustainability person. It's usually somebody under the CFO, but for us still to be able to seamlessly collect the data. We also work with a number of supply chain managers at some larger corporates, and they have all these different suppliers who don't have deep knowledge of carbon accounting or sustainability, and we're able to still track and report on that data. So I think those are some of the powerful things about being able to use our platform as opposed to some of the others.
Cool. Now, and this is all amazing, like what Green Project's able to power, and then where we sort of work together. What is it that, I guess, setting the context of what is it that or where do our common customers require a bespoke solution, and then how we are actually able to integrate and what that integration kind of looks like?
Yeah, the biggest one is definitely with financed emissions, and even insurance companies are doing with underwriting and things like that. There's three parts to this. One is that a lot of large enterprises have very complex internal systems. So there's all different data required from what the amount of being loaned out to different companies to the actual pulling out data from their ERP systems and purchasing information. And so to be able to get all of that data, which really requires a custom integration to that, is one of the biggest value adds. But on top of that, Unqork's able to provide a full auditable trail through everything that's being done with the data collection. And so we're able to, with these very complex firms who might have, hundreds of thousands of data points that are being pulled in, provide full kind of compliant audit trails that allows for full transparency into everything being done. As well as a lot of this, like I said, requires flexibility. You might be wanting some primary data from the companies you're investing in, but you might need some estimations being used. You might need some data that's pulled from public data sources, like there's for public companies, there's some public company data sources, and Unqork's able to combine all of those disparate things or different emission data into one place for you to be able to visualize. And so for more complex places, this is kind of a necessity.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've been in our conversations with customers, one of the biggest pain points is, how do I provide something where my suppliers or my portfolio companies can self-service that information? whether through some custom portals or through direct integrations with those companies. And I think that this is a super complex problem that I think that everyone is figuring out. Unfortunately, like it's not just one industry; every industry is trying to figure this out all simultaneously, and the requirements just keep coming. Sam, thank you so much for joining us today. I always find conversations with you super informative, and I feel like I always learn something new about ESG in talking to you. And yeah, we'll be around today, and that's really it for our presentation. Unless if anyone had any questions, I think we have a few minutes now. Otherwise, we will be here after the session to also answer any questions privately. But does anyone have any questions now that we can address? Yep.
Talk a little bit about your supply chain. I guess you said the six things that you had on top in terms of carbon reduction, supply. You said your purpose-built data exchanges for supply chain. Can you expand a little bit upon what type of data and what those sources are?
Definitely, yeah. So we have the ability, there's always ways to estimate supply chain emissions, and you can use spend-based proxies and other different proxies, and those are still compliant, but there's no way then for you to reduce emissions once you do that, and they're considered the least rigorous. What we have in our platform is the ability to actually send out these surveys directly to your suppliers that you work with, and collect the emissions data from them in a really seamless way. A lot of the other things, if you were to send out a survey to your supplier, it's a big headache, and they're like, we don't want to fill this out. We usually are able to collect the relative emissions data within less than an hour of time of them working. And so we're able to really seamlessly, even if you have 10,000 suppliers, be able to collect primary data on your attributed emissions as a corporate to them.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we were discussing or that we realized in one of our initial conversations with a common customer was just how much of the portfolio and their carbon footprint was attributed to that sort of default logic, rather than applying more rigorously understood proxies.
And typically supply chain or finance, for a financial institution, that will be the majority, but for any other corporate, 70% of your emissions are your supply chain. So it's like the big chunk of it, of where you need to look at it.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. That's just about our time. So thank you for coming. And like I said, we'll be around.